It's not Deandra. It ain't Debbie. It ain't like Delphina, something crazy like that. It's just D. I just want to get that out in the open before anybody tries to come at me all sideways. But I'm so excited to speak to you guys tonight. I'm so honored. I just want to say thank you to Pastor Heron and Pastor Jeff. Thank you guys so much for entrusting me with these students. It is not an opportunity that I take lightly. And so could you guys just give it up for Pastor Heron, Pastor Jeff? Come on, somebody. God's word says you give honor where honor is due, and those two men put in sacrifice after sacrifice to lead you guys and to be here with you guys, and so you make sure that you give them a high five and say thank you after service. Everybody say, aye. Dope. So about a month ago, Pastor Heron and Pastor Jeff came to me, and they're like, hey, we have this series called Blurred Lines coming up, blah, 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 and they're like, how would you like to speak? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, how would you feel about talking about homosexuality? And I was like, yeah. Praise the Lord. Everyone just got real awkward. Yeah, it's okay. Embrace it. It's good. I love awkward. It is an awkward subject. And little did they know that when they asked me, it's actually a part of my story. And so before we jump into God's word tonight, I'm just going to be real vulnerable with you guys and real honest. And with that, here's something that you need to learn. When somebody's honest with you, when someone's transparent with you, when someone opens up their heart and is vulnerable and is showing you pieces of their heart that not everybody gets to see, don't take it for granted. And don't just look at it and step on it, like look at it and it's like, oh, thanks for being vulnerable. Let me just talk to my neighbor the whole time while you're talking. Let me be a distraction to the people around me. Let me show you that I really don't care about what you have to say. And so tonight, Alive, I'm going to ask for you guys. I'm so glad you get to be here and hang out with your friends. But I'm also going to ask you to just listen. If you could just pause those conversations and say, hey, I'll talk to you after service. I just really need to listen to this. Because it's not about me speaking. It's about, I believe that God has something good for you to learn about today. And so I don't need you to pay attention to me. I just need you to pay attention to what God has for you tonight. So everybody say, all right? Everybody say, keep it real or don't keep it. Come on, somebody. And so, like I said, my name's Dee Dee. I'm 23 years old. I enjoy long walks on the beach. I'm just kidding. But I grew up as a pastor's kid. I've been a pastor's kid for 22 years of my life. There's one year that I got where I wasn't a pastor's kid, and I loved every minute of it. It was when I was born. It was awesome. I remember like it was yesterday. But I grew up as a pastor's kid, and as you can imagine, it sucked a lot. I'm just going to be real honest with you guys tonight. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything at all. So I hated being a pastor's kid because people would look at me and they would put me on this pedestal. They would put me on a stage like this, and every time that I tripped and fell, every time that I messed up, every time that I didn't do something that they liked, they would point at me and say like, oh my gosh, look at the pastor's daughter. She's doing this, this, and this. She's a horrible person. But their kids were doing the same thing. It didn't make sense. It did not make sense to me that why did I get in more trouble because I was a pastor's kid, yet all these kids my age were doing the same exact thing. It didn't make any sense to me at all. And so as a pastor's kid, my parents, they're actually first-generation Christians. They grew up, my mom was a gang member out in South Central LA. She was a part of LA's most violent gang in history. Not even kidding. She probably has a warrant. Just don't tell anybody that. So, sorry, Mom. And my dad actually was addicted to meth. And he met my mom because my mom was selling meth to him, and then they just fell in love. I'm like, what an awesome love story. Like, how'd you guys meet? I was selling drugs to him, and then he wanted my body. Like, what? That's just not even, oh, man, that don't make no sense. But it's all good because, like that song that we sang earlier, says all things are working for my good because he's an intentional God. So I'm here to tell you, wherever you are in your life, whatever you're doing, that it's going to work out for your good in the end because that's a promise. That was just for free. So I'm just going to leave that there for you. Pick it up if you want it. But being a pastor's kid and being with my parents they were just really new to the ministry, I suffered a lot as a child. Not in a bad way. I wasn't like starving or anything. Clearly I was not starving. But I did suffer in my relationship with my parents. I didn't get a lot of time with them because they made sacrifices for the church. And unfortunately, our family time was one of them. And being the only girl with 4 brothers, 3 older and 1 younger, I didn't get a lot of attention and affection that I needed as a little girl. I didn't get a lot of love. I didn't get a lot of, I didn't hear you're beautiful a lot when I was younger. I didn't hear you're going to do great things. I just didn't get those. Those were foreign. I knew that my parents loved me, but it just was I didn't feel it. And as a little girl growing up, you need to feel those things. It's crucial to your future. And so I didn't get it. But I was a very outgoing kid. I'm still very outgoing. I'm still let's go do whatever. Well, why not? Let's go have fun. Let's adventure. And so growing up with that kind of personality, what happened was in high school, I was very popular. I played water polo, volleyball, and swim. I was varsity, all 3, and it was great. I loved it. It was awesome. But what sucked was the part where I still struggled a lot with my self-image because I wasn't being told at home that I was beautiful, that I was going to do great things, that I had a bright future, that I was loved. I suffered through it through high school. In my freshman year, although I was very popular, I struggled with believing the lie that I wasn't ever going to be enough for somebody to love. And so what I would do is I would, because I was good at sports and because I knew that I was good at singing, I would use that for people's attention. Because when someone tells you, hey, you're really beautiful, or hey, you have a beautiful voice, that sounds good. It feels good. And so I struggled a lot with feeling like no guy was ever going to love me. I struggled a lot with I'm a tomboy. I play a lot of sports. I'm very outspoken. I have 4 brothers. I know how to fight. Don't test me. I just struggled a lot with nobody's going to want me. Why would any man want to date a girl that could beat him? Let's be honest. Let's be honest. I'm just kidding. But not kidding though. So I struggled a lot with that. And one day, it came to a point where I was just desperate for love. It came to a point where I was just desperate to hear that I was beautiful. It came to a point where I was desperate. I would do anything. It did not matter. I was I'm going to do whatever it takes, because when you're desperate for something, even the bad things feel good. And so what happened was I had this friend. She was a very beautiful girl. She was awesome. We were best friends. It was great. And then one day she just made a pass at me, and I let her because she told me I was beautiful. Because she told me that I was great and I had a beautiful voice and I had a bright future, and she told me that she loved me, and it felt good. When you don't hear those things, it feels good even when it comes from the wrong person. Even when it comes from the wrong person. And so we were together for the rest of my sophomore year into my junior year, and it was during my junior year, during spring break. I remember this like it was yesterday. It was March 25th during my spring break, And I came home, and my parents, I don't know how they found out, but they found out that I was with this girl. And let me just tell you this. What's done in the dark is going to come to the light. It doesn't matter. It does not matter how, it doesn't matter when, and you're never going to know, but it will. What you're doing that you think nobody sees, it's going to come to light. I'll touch on that later. Okay. So I came home, and my parents found out, and they went crazy. Rightfully so, they did. But my mom is Samoan, and she does not hold back at all, at all. And so I remember, guys, she was hitting me in my face. I remember this like it was yesterday. She was hitting me and just saying, my daughter will not be a lesbian. And it was just hitting me over and over. And then I tried to fight back, and that just went really bad. But over and over for hours. And my dad, I remember sitting on the stairs of our house, and my dad looking me in his eyes saying, you are the biggest disappointment of my life. You are such a disappointment. And I remember two of my brothers were home. And they didn't do anything. And they just stood there silent. And they're confused, and they're scared, right? They're not wrong for this at all. I'm not blaming them for any reason. They were right for responding the way they were responding, but it was so hurtful. And then I had my grandparents come over for them to only tell me, I'm so sad that I'm not going to spend eternity with you. You know you're going to hell, right? I had another brother on my phone, on the phone with me, and I was just crying and saying, you're going to go to hell. And at that point, I was just like, okay, let me go, because I just didn't choose one day to be this. I didn't choose one day to just let her come make a pass at me. It progressed over the years that I wasn't told that I was enough. It progressed over the years that I wasn't told that I wasn't loved. And I'm not saying my parents are bad parents. My family is awesome, and I love them with my whole body. I would say my heart, but my body is bigger than my heart. But it just got to that point where it's like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, which means do not try and tell somebody something if you have never had the relationship to speak into their life anyways. And I believe that there are some of you in this room that actually deal with that same tension. Maybe one of your loved ones struggles with same-sex attraction. Maybe one of your cousins or family members, your best friend is struggling with homosexuality or whatever that is, whatever it is. And you love them, but you also know that being a Christian means that we don't believe in that. We believe that it's wrong, and so you love them and you want to be in their life, but you also have been told that these horrible things about homosexuals are going to hell and all these things, and so you just don't know how to respond. Or maybe you're somebody sitting in this room where you actually look at homosexuals with disgust on your face, and as I started to share my own story, how you viewed me actually started to change because you couldn't believe that was my story. How could you are so disgusted. You're so disgusted and so humiliated by homosexuals that it literally drives you to hating them. Or maybe you're somebody sitting in this room and you actually struggle with it in yourself. And you haven't spoken up because you're scared. And I'm here to tell you tonight, alive, that there's a story in the Bible where I believe, hey, good looking out. Do I look thirsty or something? Jeez, I'm just kidding. Don't answer that question. Maybe you're somebody in this, so maybe one of those, you fall into one of those categories. And I'm here to tell you guys that there's a story in the Bible by Jesus, and he teaches us a better way of treating people. And I want to talk to you guys about that. So if you have your Bibles, if you could turn with me to John chapter 8. John is in the New Testament, so it's in the second half of the Bible, and it's the fourth book. So it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. John chapter 8, when you're there, say, yeah. Yeah. Good. There you go, girl. Good looking out. Come on, somebody. We're going to jump right into this. Then they all went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." Pause. This is super awkward. When I first read it, I was like, how did you just catch her in adultery? Like, if you don't know what adultery is, that's when somebody, a woman or a man, is having sex with somebody that's not their husband or wife. So she was cheating on the dude. She had a side chick, or he had a side chick, whatever you want to call it. And so it's just, when I first read this, like, this is so awkward. How did you just catch them in the act? Like, did you plan something? You know, like, how did you just know they were just doing it and then you found them doing it? Like, awkward. That's so weird. Anyways, that's just how I felt. So let's keep reading. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with this woman standing there. Verse 10, listen to this, guys. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No, one, sir," she said. "Neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go and leave your life of sin." So I'm just going to jump right into explaining this story. What was happening is, so this woman was caught in adultery. And back then, adultery is a sin. It still is a sin, so it's still a sin. And so what they're doing, the Pharisees during that time were actually considered religious leaders. These Pharisees believed that if they memorized the Bible enough, if they did enough, if they prayed enough, if they did all these things, then they would earn their way into heaven. So these Pharisees knew the law, they knew the Bible, they knew God and everything. They were Christians, as we would say today. And so what they did is they bring this woman that was caught in adultery to the temple, which would be like right here in today's world. And so they bring her here, and they are like, hey, this woman was caught in adultery. The law of Moses that we live by says that we are to kill her. The consequence of her action is death. And they asked Jesus, what do you say? Okay, and Jesus does something real weird. When I first read it, I was like, why are you writing in the dirt, Jesus? This woman's going to die. I'm going to need you to, step up and do something. Why are you playing in the dirt? Don't play in the dirt. That's gross. And so, but Jesus did. He bends down, he writes in the dirt, and he stands up and he asks them a question. He said, okay, you without sin, go ahead and throw the stone at her. And then he goes back down and he starts playing in the dirt again. Why are you doing weird things? Gosh, they're going to kill her. And so what they come to realize is that the Pharisees actually heard what Jesus was saying. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and then they say something and then 5 minutes later you're like, oh, that's what they meant. I get it. I do that a lot. So that's what happened. The Pharisees were like, oh, shoot. I get what you're saying, Jesus. And they put their stones down and they walked away until nobody was left with her and it was just her and Jesus. And Jesus says, hey, where are your accusers? And the lady says, nowhere. And he says, neither do I accuse you, meaning neither do I judge you, neither do I condemn you, neither do I throw a stone at you. And then he says, go and leave your life of sin. Here's what's crazy. When Jesus was bent down to write in the sand, he wasn't just doing weird things down there. In Hebrew tradition, way back then, if you were caught breaking a commandment, they would take you to the temple courts, and then they would accuse you, and there had to be 2 eyewitnesses to confirm what was actually done. And then the priest would get down in this dust of the temple and write the sin you committed and your name, and then they would stone you. And it's not just little baby stones. It's like this. And they wouldn't just throw one. They would throw them at you until you died. Wait a minute. Girl, don't play. So, but what Jesus was doing, so what's crazy, when I was reading this story, when I learned about that history, what tripped me up is that the Pharisees weren't wrong. They were not wrong for making their accusations. Yes, they had different intentions to trick Jesus, but that's a different sermon for another day. I'm just going to talk about what's surfaced right now. They weren't wrong. They were actually following the law. If you broke the law, then your punishment was to die. You're going to die by stones. So they weren't wrong when they took the woman to Jesus. They were not wrong. And then when Jesus bent down to write in the dust, that wasn't weird for them. That was normal for them because that was their tradition. So for all of their lives, they've seen this process happen. And so when Jesus bent down the sand, they just assumed, oh, he's writing out her name and what she did. Write it, Jesus. You better write that down because I'm about to throw this stone at her once you, that's what they're thinking in their mind. And then Jesus stands up and asks them and says to them, okay, if you without sin, go ahead and throw it at her. And then he continues to write out. But what's crazy and what many scholars believe about what Jesus was writing in the sand is that he was actually writing the sin that the accusers were living in their life that nobody knew about. And so what Jesus was saying then to them was okay, go ahead, throw a rock at her. But if you throw a rock at her, throw one at yourself because remember when you did this? It's so easy. It was so easy. It was so comfortable for the Pharisees, for the religious people, for the Christians. It's so easy for us Christians to look at people around us and to point out the sin in their life, but then we can't even point out the ones in ours. There's a verse in Matthew chapter 7, starting at verse 3. And it says, what does it say? It says something real good, y'all. Let me just read it to you. It says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye when you have a plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time you have a plank in your own? You hypocrite. First take out the plank in your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck in your brother's eye. You see, Jesus, when he was writing in the sand, what he was doing when he did that was he made the ground at the foot of the cross level, meaning that he was showing them no sin is greater than each other. So if you lied yesterday, you just get in here, let me throw a stone at you because you sinned too. And as Christians, it's so easy for us to look at homosexuals and look at people that are struggling with their sin out loud, and it's visual, and we see them and we're like, you suck, you're going to hell, I can't believe you would do that, why would you ever, you're messing up. And it's so easy for us to look at people and to judge them and to pick up stones and to throw it at them, but we can't even see that we're sinning too. Just because, listen guys, just because nobody sees what websites you are on late at night, just because you clear the browser history does not mean that you did not commit a sin. It means that you're just not struggling out loud like the people that struggle with same-sex attraction. Just because you think lying isn't that big of a deal, just because you think cheating on your test or disobeying your parents isn't a big deal, you're actually breaking commandments. So what does that mean? Come over here, let me throw a stone at you. If you want to condemn people for the sin that they live or the sin that they're struggling with, then you can't. And that's what in that verse in Matthew is saying, like, why are you going to judge somebody else for the speck of sawdust? Do you know how big a speck of sawdust is? If I could show you, I would, but it's so small. You can't even see a speck of sawdust, but there's a plank in your own eye that you don't even want to look at because you're too busy pointing out everybody else's sin. And so what I want to challenge you guys to do tonight is there's a bunch of rocks down here. If the band could come up and play, actually, please. Before I get into the rocks, actually, the night that my parents found out about everything, and everything happened, and we finally were done yelling and punching each other and stuff, I sat in my room by myself, completely alone in the dark, and I just cried. And it wasn't that I hated my parents, and it wasn't that I hated my family. I just could not understand why people that called themselves Christians could respond in such a hateful way. And it was when I was sitting in my room alone that my oldest brother, Bobby, who was actually living in Newport at the time, I was in East Highland, he drove home. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't even know. And he drove home, and he opens the door to my room, and he just sits behind me. I was sitting in my bed, so he sits behind me, and he just hugs me. And we just cried. We just cried for hours. And the only thing that he said to me was, I love you. I love you. And as easy and as comfortable it would have been for my brother to pick up a stone and to throw it at me and say, you're going to hell, he risked his own comfort for my heart, for the sake of my heart. And when he did that, that's when love won for me. Could you imagine if we were a group of people that chose to put the comfortable stones down for the sake of our friends, for the sake of our family, for the sake of this world? Could you imagine, especially with this election just happening, everybody's so pissed and everybody has comfortable stones in their hands. They're ready to throw them at Trump. They're ready to throw them at Trump supporters because it's so easy. It's so easy to look at him and say, you're a racist, you're a womanizer, you do all of these things wrong, but I'm here to tell you, yeah, and you struggle with lying, and you watch pornography, and you do all these things that nobody sees. But it's so easy for you to throw it at him. Why? What's the difference? There's no difference. And so when you choose to put your comfort aside and to love the person in front of you, to just be present. My brother was present with me in my mess. And that was the greatest gift anybody could have ever given me. He was present in my mess. He didn't try and fix me. He didn't tell me what I needed to do. He didn't give me a laundry list of, you got to do this, and then you're going to be awesome. It's like, no. He actually didn't know how to walk me through the process, but he was with me, and that's all that mattered. It's so easy to just fix people than it is to sit with them in the uncomfortability. But when you do that, you have to know that presence is powerful. And when you just sit there in their message, Jesus literally was with that woman. He was the only one left with that woman. And he said to her, where are your accusers? And she said, nowhere. And he was like, yeah, I know. I don't accuse you either. I just really love you. And so these stones, there's stones all over this altar right here. And on one side, it says comfort. And on the other side, it says love. And I want to challenge you guys tonight. Alive. If you are somebody that maybe you know somebody in your life that's struggling with homosexuality or struggling with same-sex attraction, or they're struggling with anything. They're struggling with pornography. They're struggling with lying. They're struggling with cheating. They're struggling with whatever. I want to challenge you. If you want to learn how to love people well, if you want to learn the right approach, because here, like I said earlier, the Pharisees weren't wrong. They were actually really right. They were so right. She was committing a sin, but their approach was so wrong. It was so wrong. Could you imagine if you just loved the people around you without judging them, without throwing stones at them? Could you imagine what if it could put yourself in it? Could you imagine with everything that you're doing in your life to have somebody that just says, I love you anyway? We're both broken, and it's okay that that we can't fix each other, but I do know somebody that paid the price for me to find resolution to these problems, and his name is Jesus. And so if you want to learn how to love people well, if you want to learn how to respond the way that Jesus responded to this woman caught in adultery, if you want to learn how to respond the way my brother responded to me in my mess, I want to challenge you to come get a stone and carry it with you for a week. And every time that you want to judge somebody, pull it out and look at it. And only you can make this decision. I can't make you not throw the rock. If you want to throw the rock, throw the rock. That's your decision. But it's how, which one are you going to choose? Are you going to choose what's comfortable and what's easy and what's normal these days, to just judge somebody and throw the rock at them and not care? Or will you choose to love them? And will you choose to put the rock down and say, me too? And if that's you tonight, if you want to be that person, come up, come get a rock, come grab a rock. And we're just going to worship. We're just going to sing one last song together tonight.